Hello everyone, my name is Preston Dennett and welcome to a new episode of UFOs and the Paranormal. I'm going to be talking about humanoids today, probably no surprise to most of you out there, but I do love these humanoid accounts. I think they represent the cutting edge of research. We dive right into the very heart of the UFO phenomenon with these kinds of accounts, and they have so much to teach us. So the title of today's episode is Do You Want to Come With Us? And 9 other extraordinary encounters with extraterrestrials. It's amazing. I think it's really the huge number of cases that represent the best evidence that something is going on here, that we are being visited. But each case does offer a unique perspective into extraterrestrial contact. In some ways, these accounts are as unique as the people who have them. But then again, they also have remarkable commonalities that really, I think, exclude any explanations such as hoaxes, hallucinations, misperceptions, or mental illness. There's an incredible consistency to these reports. And again, that aspect of high strangeness. I'm going to take you all over the world today. 10 cases that are truly extraordinary, dating from 1951 to 1980. I know some of you out there are asking for more recent cases, and when I find them, I do present them. But this is the heyday of extraterrestrial contact. This was at a time when research was, I think, being done really well. So the 10 locations we will be covering today include Argentina, Brazil, Chile, Mexico, Uruguay, England, Wales, Canada, Romania, and one case from the United States, Idaho. So let's get started. And the first case I'm going to be covering is one from the United States. I call this one, I Thought It Was a Joke. This one occurred in 1951 at Mountain Home Air Force Base in Boise, Idaho. And this is a truly poignant and important case because I think it really illustrates that there was a cover-up going on even this early into the UFO era. This first case comes from news reporter and writer Jim Broad and was published in the St. Paul, Minnesota Dispatch East newspaper. It only peripherally involves apparent humanoids, though they are there, and it is so interesting and unusual that I just had to include it. The witness, we do know his name. He is Walter DeYoung, and he was one of 120 people stationed at Mountain Home Air Force Base in Boise, Idaho, which, in 1951, the time of the encounter, had been recently reactivated as a departure point for personnel going to the Korean War. It was a summer night in 1951, and about 60 people were on the base. The main witness, Walter, was in his barracks reading the book The Age of Reason by Tom Paine, when suddenly one of the men ran into the barracks shouting out, "There's a UFO above the runway." Walter didn't believe him and just told him, "That's just great. Go have a ball." As Walter says, "Of course I thought it was a joke. In those days, I was 100% a non-believer when it came to UFOs. So I stayed in bed with my book. But it must have been 10 minutes later when he came running in again. 'Come on out,' he said. 'You have got to see it to believe it.' Well, I still thought somebody was pulling my leg. Then I heard them crank up an old C-45, an 8-passenger aircraft that most of us thought it unsafe to fly. But it was the only plane on the base. So I figured something must be up. That got me outside. Apparently, I was the last guy to arrive on the scene. Everybody was there, gawking at a saucer-like object hovering 400 to 500 feet above the runway. It must have been 20 or 25 feet in diameter. We had never seen anything like it before. We didn't know what to make of it. Now, of course, there wasn't supposed to be any aircraft in the area, and certainly not right over the runway. And as it hovered there, the radio operator was trying unsuccessfully to make radio contact with it. Meanwhile, the object just floated there, flashing colored lights, moving slowly closer, close enough to see portholes, and through the portholes, something or someone was inside. As Walter says, I can't remember the exact sequence of colors. I think it was a combination of red, blue, purple, and white. It was also close enough for us to see that it wasn't spinning. I tell you, it was mind-boggling. I've never been the same guy since. We just waited there, expecting that it would land. We were mesmerized. Eventually it got close enough to see portholes. Something inside. But just what? I can't say. Maybe it was creatures. Maybe it was the backs of chairs. So after a few attempts, some of the officers finally got the C-45 aircraft airborne, and they attempted to intercept the UFO. As Walter says, it must have taken a half hour to get that crate airborne. For a while, we didn't think it would make it. It stalled near the end of the runway and had to start all over again. But finally, up it went. It circled around and moved in on the object from above. But then the object took off. It went straight up, silently, into the atmosphere at a fantastic speed. We looked at it in awe, until it was just the size of a pinhead. So after it was gone, everyone began to speculate about the possibility of it being an advanced military craft from the US or perhaps some other country. But soon others there talked about other sightings that they had had. And as Walter says, quote, soon I became a believer. Now it was shortly after this sighting that all the witnesses were transferred away from the base. And that's very telling. As Walter says, those of us there that night were quickly reassigned all over creation. I ended up in New Mexico. It was as if some higher-ups didn't want us talking to each other about what happened. It seems strange that some investigators didn't come in to question us. So weirdly, nobody talked about it. Walter speculated that, quote, maybe subconsciously we had been conditioned not to talk by some power or force that we can't even begin to understand. It's as if nothing ever happened. I wish I could remember even one name. That's what seems so strange. I can't even remember the name of the Mormon officer who came running into the barracks. I know a colonel was in charge of the base. He almost had a nervous breakdown. So it is true that we can't say for sure that that case involves humanoids, but let's face it, somebody was piloting that craft. And I really wonder what the purpose of this sighting was, given that it hovered so low over the Air Force base there. They must have been up to something. I'm guessing this was kind of a display. I don't know. There's some interesting things going on at that Air Force base at the time. It was sort of a PSYOPs training center, so maybe that has something to do with it. I don't know, but truly an astonishing case. And the way that so many of the witnesses were sent out all over the country to sort of separate them, I think illustrates that this was a very deliberate cover-up on the part of the government or the folks behind the UFO cover-up. Now let's move to this next case. We're going to go to Wales now. It's amazing how many these cases are all over the world. I call this next case, They Were Very Concerned. This one occurred in 1952 in an area called Castlemartin in Wales. And this case is technically hearsay, as we're hearing it from the witness's wife. But it's a truly amazing case that I think deserves to be well known. And it's got a very important message as well. This case comes from Nellie Thomas, wife of the main witness, Mr. Thomas, and was first revealed by Janet and Colin Board in their book, Modern Mysteries of Britain. And of course there was a brief follow-up by researcher Lucius Farish. It took place in a very old and quaint village in Wales by the name of Castlemartin, most famous perhaps for its dramatic limestone cliffs and ruins of ancient forts. But perhaps significantly, this location since 1939 is used by the Ministry of Defense as a live firing range for armored units and tank gunnery training. So war exercises are going on in this area, and given what happens in this incident, this could be significant. This incident again took place in 1951, and I'll just quote Mrs. Nellie Thomas directly, as she says, "My husband was taking an after-lunch walk when he saw the UFO shining very brightly in a sheltered spot amongst the sand dunes. Naturally, he went nearer to investigate and saw the occupants on top of the saucer. One of them, who was obviously the captain of the crew, spoke to him in perfect English and told him not to approach any closer because he was not wearing any protective clothing like they were, and therefore could be injured by the strong rays emitted by their craft, which was then in the process of being recharged by the sun. He told me that they looked just like we did, and that they said that they had been traveling to and around our planet for 5 years and were then about to make their return journey. They told him the name of their planet, but I cannot remember it. They said that their crafts had been landing on the wastelands in America for hundreds of years because they were less likely to be interrupted there in their examination of the soil and terrain, which is exactly what our craft have been doing on the moon in recent years. They were very concerned that our Earth was on a course of self-destruction and wished that they could be allowed to help prevent this. They said that as scientists, their knowledge was far in advance of ours on this planet. My husband was very impressed with all the information which they gave him, especially as he had a brilliant brain himself and therefore could appreciate it. I'm sorry that I cannot remember anything more, and there is no written record, unfortunately. But suffice it to say that many of their predictions at that time have been and are still being proved right with regards to our planet. Now Nellie is a retired school teacher. She believes her husband was telling, quote, the untarnished truth about his encounter, and that ET's main concern is about the future of our planet. As Nellie says, they told him they came in peace, and that they were distressed to witness that Earth was set on a course for self-destruction. They were certainly friendly. Now Nellie says that her husband did not want to go public for fear of being ridiculed and disbelieved, but she decided that his account was important to share. As Nellie says, flying saucers were almost unheard of at that time. Any account then, especially in this part of the world, would have been termed fantasy and treated with skepticism. One interesting point my husband told me was that the aliens, who looked just like us, recharged their machine batteries by the sun's rays. 7 years after the war, solar power was not widely discussed. Today, it is being used more and more. Maybe we have learned something from folk on other planets. It's a darn shame that we didn't get to talk to the witness firsthand, because I am sure he had more details to share. But this is a really good illustration of how this cover-up that is worldwide has really pushed this subject into the fringe. He was too afraid of being ridiculed and disbelieved to come forward. I'm very encouraged now that this subject is going mainstream and that so many people are finding the courage to come forward and share their experiences, because there are a lot of them. And again, they have so much to teach us. And it's interesting to me that this case is a very early example of ETs warning us about the dangers of war and aggression and so forth. And you can see it. We've lost a lot of people on this planet due to our own misbehavior. What the ETs must think of us. So now let's move to the next case. This one is in England, and I call this one Terror Struck Me. This occurred in the late 1950s. We don't have an exact date, but it occurred in Leigh, Manchester, England. We do know exactly where it occurred, and it is a first-hand account, which technically was not investigated by a UFO researcher, but instead was sent in a letter to a newspaper from the first-hand witness. But I think you'll find it a really compelling case. This case comes from the first-hand witness, Mrs. C. Wickens of Lunsford Lane. This is in Larkfield, England, and it was presented in a letter to the newspaper titled Terrifying Beings. This was published in the Evening Post in Maidstone, England. Now, Mrs. Wickens' encounter took place one evening around 10:30 p.m. in the late 1950s. She had gone to visit her sister's house in the town of Leigh, England, and afterwards had left the house to walk to the bus station to catch the last bus and go home. She did not go home that evening, as Mrs. Wickens says. Starting to walk around the village green, I noticed 3 figures crouching on the grass verge, and as my eyes became accustomed to the dark, I was aware of several groups of beings standing nearby in threes and fours. They appeared to be dressed in clothing of dazzling white, the headgear closely fitting like a balaclava helmet. I was instantly aware of a strange quietness. They all stood motionless. Not a whisper could I hear. I felt all eyes upon me. As I proceeded, I saw standing ahead of me to my left one solitary figure, like a giant robot well over 6 feet tall. Terror struck me. I felt I couldn't go on, and I turned and ran back. So Mrs. Wickens ran back to her sister's house, told her what she had seen, and her sister's response was that she must have seen Boy Scouts camping for the night in the park. Now, Mrs. Wickens, of course, does not endorse this explanation. But as she says, I have never seen a UFO, but I'm more than convinced I've seen occupants from an alien craft. It's only during recent years, with the news of UFOs, that my experience seems possible to relate. Truth can be stranger than fiction. So I don't know about these figures that this witness seeing being Boy Scouts, like her sister said. Certainly the witness herself did not think so. I think this case illustrates how truly terrifying it can be to have an encounter, because things might have turned out differently if she had the courage to just face these guys and see what they were up to. I don't know, can't blame her. This has got to be a very disconcerting experience, especially for people who were skeptical perhaps, or had never really thought about this subject. So people behave in all different kinds of ways. And this next case is a good illustration of that as well. I call this next case, Do You Want to Come With Us? We're going to Chile for this case. This occurred in December 1968 in Santiago, Chile. This one is sort of the title story of this episode, and I just found it intriguing because this is an offer a number of contactees do get. And it's really interesting to me how this witness reacted. This case comes from researcher and author Jorge Eduardo Anfruns and was published in his book OVNIs, Extraterrestres y Otras en Chile. It also appeared in the Crónica newspaper and in Chilean newspapers. It is a single witness case, but the witness did allow his real name to be used. He is Robert Iglesias, and he's a good witness, a Chilean agricultural engineer and an officer at the State Agricultural and Cattle Service in charge of the National Agricultural Project. But it did take him 10 years to go public with his story. Per Roberto, one day in December 1968, while living in his home on the outskirts of Santiago, Chile, he was in his home next to the window when he saw a brilliant oval craft, shaped somewhat like a top, and it landed next to his house. Immediately, two beings, very similar to humans, but dressed in tight-fitting, glowing jumpsuits, exited the craft and began to approach the witness. As he says, they advanced towards the window where I was and signaled me to come out. I opened the window and we started a short dialogue. The being spoke in perfect Spanish, and at the end of the conversation told him, "We have come to invite you on a space journey. Do you want to come with us?" Now, already amazed by what was happening, this question left the witness even more amazed, and all these thoughts began running through his head. He thought about Einstein's theory of relativity, and then became concerned about the possibility that the ETs might do experiments on him, and he also wondered what would happen to his wife and children should he not return. So these and other thoughts raced through his mind, and after thinking about it, he responded to their question. He told them, and I quote, "I thank you for choosing me among millions of other humans that live on Earth, but I am a family man, responsible for my wife and children, and would cause them worry if I am gone, and would not like to cause concern should I suddenly disappear from home." So the beings seemed to understand. They both bowed slightly and returned to their craft, which promptly took off and disappeared into the sky. Afterwards, according to the witness, there was an area of scorched grass on the ground where the craft had rested. That is admittedly a very short case, sparse on details. But how interesting is that? Makes you wonder, if you were given the offer to go with the ETs, would you take it? It's amazing how many people do get this offer. And certainly this might explain some of the missing folks we have on this planet. Hard to say, there's many reasons people do go missing, but you have to wonder, because this does happen fairly consistently. Maybe not super common, but yeah, it does happen. Now let's move to the next case. We're going to Canada now. I call this next one, All My Life I Had Dreamed of Such a Moment. This occurred on July 7, 1972, in a little town called Racine. This is in Quebec, Canada. I like this case. I think this might be my favorite or my second favorite of this compilation. It's got animal reactions. It has an apparent recovery of an alien artifact. There's some doubt about that, some skepticism, but you can take a look at it yourself. I'm just reporting the evidence as we know it, the facts as they have been reported. Again, I'm not pushing any narrative here. It's up to all of you to decide what's going on. But this case is definitely really interesting. The witness in this next case is known only as Mr. Joly. He's from the small town of Racine in Estrie, Quebec, Canada. It took him about 10 years to go public. This case was published in Le Journal de Quebec in the December 1983 and January 1983 issues. And as the witness says, it was about 8:30 p.m. I was at home with my wife. Suddenly, the cows began to charge the fence between them and the road, bawling loudly without stopping. When I went out to see what was going on, I noticed that they were all looking in the same direction, towards the far end of the field, about 2,000 feet away. When I looked that way, I saw what I believe to be a flying saucer. Two small beings were involved in some activity near the reddish aircraft. The beings seemed to be at ease in our atmosphere and wore no helmets. They were of a greenish color. No, unfortunately, Mr. Joly does not describe the appearance of the short figures in any more detail, though it was perhaps too dark or too far away for him to see too much, or perhaps he was just too amazed. But, as he says, all my life I had dreamed of such a moment. My wife saw what I did, but tried to get me to return to the house in fear that I would be abducted. I remained calm and walked away from the house, closing the door behind me. The cattle were still bawling as loudly as possible. I walked towards the craft, plainly visible in the open field, a couple of thousand feet from my house. However, I had not taken 2 steps before the 2 beings noticed my presence and got back into their craft. A third being, whom I had not previously noticed, was about 100 feet away from the craft and traveled at lightning speed towards it. A door closed behind them, and the flying saucer rose vertically into the air at medium speed, then disappeared or dematerialized at slightly above the level of the treetops. A few seconds later, the cattle stopped bellowing and calm was restored. So Mr. Joly returned inside, and then later, accompanied by his 2 sons, aged 7 and 9, found a, quote, saucer nest. This was on the ground where the saucer had been. The wild grass in this area was normally about 3 feet tall, but the area where the saucer had sat was flattened in a spiral pattern 25 feet wide with a small tuft about 2 feet in diameter in the center of the circle. This confirmed certainly to Mr. Joly that everything he had seen was real. But it was during the inspection of this site that Mr. Joly's 9-year-old son discovered a spherical piece of shiny metal in the field, and it was heavy and hard enough that they were unable to cut it in two with a saw. So samples were taken and sent out to be analyzed at a laboratory at Laval University in Quebec. The results were somewhat inconclusive, showing that the object appeared to be 72% silicon, 27% iron, and other trace minerals. The analysts believed it could have been a piece of meteorite, perhaps natural slag, or some kind of manufactured product. It was neither radioactive nor magnetic, so ultimately they were not able to trace its origin. I was not able to find the laboratory analysis of this piece of metal, which allegedly, perhaps, came from this encounter. Though hard to say, perhaps they just found this piece of metal in the place where this craft landed and there's no relation whatsoever. But either way, of course, the case does stand on its own. It's a truly extraordinary case of a apparently landed UFO and humanoids. And it's interesting to me because so many people out there would really love to have an encounter, and this guy got his wish. What an extraordinary case. So now let's move to the next one. Most of these cases are very obscure, and I'm guessing you haven't heard of them. This one you might have heard of. I found it really extraordinary. This is kind of similar to another case I covered earlier, where an ET visited a medical doctor in his office. And that's what happened in this case, which I call I Met a Spaceman. This one occurred on November 28 in 1976 in Guadalajara, Mexico. And I can tell you, this case caused waves at very high levels of government. This case caught the attention of many UFO researchers, including Timothy Good, Hakan Blomqvist, Reinario Hernandez, journalist Michael Packer, and many others. The witness is a physician, Dr. Leopoldo Diaz Martinez, a good witness. And he says that on November 28, 1976, he was in his physician's office in Guadalajara, New Mexico, when he met an extraterrestrial. At the time, there was a wave of sightings occurring over Mexico, and in fact, in October of 1976, a 600-foot wide craft was seen to settle over a small mountain near Guadalajara and was viewed by many people. Reportedly, cars in the area lost power in their engines, so drivers just got out and watched this craft making maneuvers. But this could be connected to the experience of Dr. Leopoldo Diaz. There is some confusion about the date. Some sources say either October 28 or November 28, 1976. But as there is a handwritten letter from the doctor himself showing the November 28 date, I'm going to go with that one. At the time of his encounter, Dr. Diaz was 45 years old and a respected physician, a graduate of the University of the Guadalajara Medical School. He had been in private practice for 23 years, mostly as a pediatrician, and he was the executive director of one of the largest hospitals in Guadalajara. So it was around noon when he found an unusual-looking man in his waiting room who asked to be given a physical examination. Dr. Diaz was immediately shocked by the man's appearance. He had skin that was very white. He was almost completely bald. And as Dr. Diaz says, "I attended to my patients as usual. At 12 noon, I was ready to finish when the last patient came in, who attracted my attention very much. It was a person about 50 years old, of very white skin, almost totally bald, grayish-blue eyes, a penetrating look, and of a genial nature. I did not see him when he entered the waiting room, but I saw him paging through a magazine when I opened the door to say goodbye to another patient. When I looked at him, he got up, and I could see he was very short, about 4 foot 11 inches. With a high-pitched voice, he told me, 'I want you to give me a checkup.' I told him I would. I proceeded with the checkup and was baffled by his perfect health. His vital signs and reflexes were surprisingly normal. He was hairless except for his face, where he had a very fine fuzz. On the rest of his body, his skin was as smooth and delicate as that of a robust baby of 6 months. Upon noting this to him, he told me, 'I have always led a very healthy life without any excesses and have cultivated mental control for a long time. I have not gone to the doctor for a long time.' I almost fainted when I learned his age, 85 years. He noticed my perplexity and told me, 'I am not from here, and don't ask me where I am from, because I can't tell you.' As Dr. Diaz says, he was a little strange, a foreign man. He was quite different from the other people in Mexico, and I had never seen someone like him. So this little man said his name was Yap Zamiet. He said he came from somewhere, quote, 'beyond your sun.' He wanted to be examined, he told Dr. Diaz, only to provide proof that he was, quote, 'from another world.' and he then proceeded to share volumes of information with the witness about many different topics, including astronomy, physics, nuclear power, religion, and more. As the ET reportedly said, and this is according to Dr. Diaz, I'm quoting the ET directly, "There are more planets in this solar system that have not yet been discovered. Several, such as I, are distributed throughout the world, trying to enter into conscientious or reliable people who are disposed to help us make our presence known without causing any fear. We want to help improve the general conditions of development on Earth and avoid the evils that can lead you to chaos. Through man's increasing dependence on nuclear energy, this order of mankind is very close to an end. Listen carefully to the message I am going to give you. Pay attention. God exists as a creative being. Matter does not exist in itself. There is a single universal current from which everything else emanates, from the microcosmos to the macrocosmos. This current is electricity." So understandably, Dr. Diaz was amazed. The man elaborated, saying, quote, "What you call electricity is all around us." He said that we on Earth do not understand the nature of electricity, and if we did, we could use it and could easily provide all the needed energy on this planet. He said that this was the power that they, the ETs, used to travel interstellar distances. And he said that they have been visiting humanity for more than 2,000 years, but more recently due to the fact that we are reaching the end of our civilization. He said that electricity is composed of more than 15 subatomic particles. Said Dr. Diaz, "He showed me great wisdom, a great knowledge, a great understanding about the conflict that is oppressing us very much in this time." So this strange visitor expounded on many other subjects, such as the poor ecological conditions of the Earth. He said that humanity was misusing atomic power, and that if we didn't heed their warnings, it could mean the end of our civilization was very near. He said that humanity was very slow in their development. He provided all kinds of information about creation, religion, and God. In fact, the ET told Dr. Diaz that there are 10,000 ETs of his kind living and working along with humanity. The visitor said that they have made repeated and direct contact with government leaders, and that our leaders are fully aware of many other personal visits and warnings, but are withholding this information from the public. As the ET says, and again this is a direct quote, "It is necessary that you people recognize that many of us are here, intermingled with you, and trying to help, because you are very close to having tremendous problems on your planet. You are misusing energy sources, and it is necessary for you to learn to find another source of energy. We are trying to give you this information because you are polluting the atmosphere. You are contaminating not only your planet, but even space, and are very close to being destroyed." As Dr. Diaz says, "These people are here. They are living here. They are not intervening in any way. They want to help us. These people are going to speak more and more. It is important to understand this. This experience is something that is facing us in these last few years." Now, per the ET, the most important message he had was about God and creation. As Dr. Diaz says, "He told me the source of power in all living things comes from the Creator. It's electricity, static electricity. He gave me the most beautiful description of man's relation to the Creator that I have ever heard." So again, here is a direct quote from this alleged ET that visited Dr. Diaz. And I quote, "God is everywhere. We must live in God. All the religions you profess on earth, they are only roads to the same purpose, to know God. Instead of following so many roads, follow only one religion, the truth. It cannot be divided. The only way for you to defeat all the conflicts you have is to show love, which is the weapon that you use to defeat selfishness. There is nothing imperfect in your cosmos. Everything is perfect. But in your mind, you have the idea of imperfection. God is in our fellow beings." So the ET told Dr. Diaz that they would meet again and then departed. Following this meeting, Dr. Diaz at first told only his family and friends for fear that people would call him crazy, but in the space of a few months he did go public, and he was amazed to hear that other contactees have received these same kinds of messages. As Dr. Diaz says, I was shocked to learn that many other people have also been contacted and have been given exactly the same message. Going public was not easy for him. In fact, he was saddened and disappointed to hear his message and his story being disbelieved and distorted by researchers and UFO groups. Despite this, he remained strong and stuck to his story. As he says, I have concrete evidence of a real fact. I met a spaceman on November 28, 1976. This is the truth. I know it is very difficult to believe this unusual happening. The easy way for the closed-minded is to call this incident a hoax. I publicly said I met a spaceman, a perfect human being, not a humanoid as some people say in a derogatory way. Some believed me, some derided me. I didn't care because I was not forcing anyone to believe me. I only was sharing my happening. So Dr. Diaz did go further and reported his experience to officials, and even spoke before the United Nations. This is verified. As researcher Timothy Good says, he struck me as being completely truthful and gave me the names of some of the United Nations delegates with whom he had spoken in New York. The meeting had taken place in the office of Robert Mueller, Undersecretary of Economic and Social Development, and accordingly, I telephoned him at the UN. Mr. Mueller confirmed the meeting with Dr. Diaz, but when I asked what the UN proposed to do about it, he replied, nothing at all. I circulated it to some people who might be able to do something about it, and I had not a single response. Bertrand Chatel, who was in charge of the Technical Applications section at the United Nations, said he also met Dr. Diaz several times in secret sessions and said, and I quote, we still need more investigations. It is the only UFO contact case we are probing. It is definitely unusual. It cannot be considered a major scientific event because we must have additional scientific evidence. Now, per ufologist Ramona Cooper, who looked into this, she says that Gordon Cooper, the astronaut, was also informed of Dr. Diaz's encounter, and Gordon Cooper allegedly replied, and I quote, I've known for some time that there has been a high-level interest in the Mexican encounter. I am not surprised at Dr. Diaz's physical description of the being. It conforms to previous encounters I have been told about. Now that's the kind of encounter I think all of us would like to have. Someone just basically knocking on your front door and introducing themselves and providing proof, or at least evidence, that they come from elsewhere. So much information in that case. I really have to hand it over to the witness for coming forward and facing the ridicule and skepticism and gaslighting that was, especially when he came forward, much more prevalent, certainly, than it is today. But such an amazing case, and I think the fact that so many researchers have taken it seriously, and that this went all the way to the United Nations and was verified to have done so, that makes it a really important case. Also very interesting that this alleged ET said that there are others like him walking among us, living and working among us. That's very intriguing. Makes you wonder, when you see people out there, could any of them be extraterrestrials? Possibly. All right. Now let's move to the next case. We're going to Romania. I've only covered, maybe one or two cases in Romania before, so it's quite a treat to find cases from this area. Most of the cases I'm covering in this episode you see are pretty much human-looking ETs. This one appears to be a little different. I call this one a dark being. This occurred on September 23rd, 1978 in the Carpathian Mountains of Romania. Carpathian Mountains? At any rate, it is a multiple witness case. It's an extraordinary sequence of events, and I think shows how unusual a UFO encounter can be. The UFO connection is somewhat tenuous, but given that there was a UFO sighting at the same time this humanoid was seen, I think there probably is a connection here, and that this being may very well be extraterrestrial. This next case comes from multiple researchers, including Romanian researcher Boxor Iosef. He is a frequent contributor to such magazines as Fortean Times and Fate magazine. This case appeared in the September 1994 issue of Fate magazine in an article called Aliens in the Carpathian Mountains. It was also investigated in depth by Colin Târcu, founder of the Romanian UFO Research, and others, including Gabriel Paul, George Butiu, Justin Capra, and of course others. It began with a sighting by two locksmiths, Martin Roth and Victor Sheta, who were working on a cable car at Balea Lake. This is a glacial lake at about 6,000 feet of altitude in the Făgăraș Mountains in the Carpathian Mountains of central Romania. It was about midnight on September 23, 1978. This was a densely foggy, dark night when the two workers were awakened by a reddish circular light hovering about 15 to 30 feet from their window. It was totally silent. They first thought that the chalet in the area might be on fire, but it clearly wasn't that. So they went through a whole series of explanations, headlamps, cars, flashlights. It was none of this, and it eventually just disappeared. But it was around this same exact time, in this same area, that a group of Romanian soldiers were working at a youth hostel. Among them was Army Private Johann Durr. He was walking around the army barracks, which were filled with other soldiers, and going outside, he was confronted with something completely outside the realm of his experience. As he says, "I observed a dark being, standing 6 to 8 meters from me. The being was about 2 meters high." Now, because of the fog and the darkness, he couldn't make out any real details other than he estimated that it was about 6 feet tall, and he shouted out, "Who's there?" but received no response. And as he says, "I ran into my barracks, but after a few minutes, I went back outside again. This time, the mysterious creature stood back against the window of the barracks. I returned to my comrades and told them what I had seen, but they laughed at me." Events weren't over yet, and in fact, they were about to escalate dramatically, because it was the very next night at 9:45 p.m., Johann and his companion, Mr. Volp, decided to leave the barracks to go check on an animal trap that had been set earlier. And as they were about to depart the barracks, Lance Sergeant Radu Ion pointed and cried out, "Look! Somebody is on the hilltop." So all three of them looked about 60 feet away towards this cable car, and they could see a dark form with the same appearance as the one seen the previous night. Bewildered and somewhat afraid, they retreated back to the barracks. Now, comparing the height of this creature to the 6-foot-tall diesel tank it was standing next to, the Lance Sergeant, Radu, estimated that the figure looked to be about 7.5 feet tall. This figure moved slowly in a way that Johann said was comparable to the way an astronaut moved, in this slow, almost floating gait. Now, at that moment, the soldiers in the next bedroom shouted out that somebody had pried open the shutters of the 7.5-foot-high windows. These were previously secured with twisted wires and a cross chain, so something with considerable strength had pried these open. Now, at the same time, the tall figure standing on this hill some distance away began to move, and some of the other soldiers began to throw rocks at it. So at this point, Lance Sergeant Radu ordered 2 other soldiers, a Mr. Cebu and a Mr. Stan, to follow him. He was holding a club or a baton to protect himself, and he began to approach the creature. And he got to within 3 to 5 feet of this figure and raised his club to strike it, when apparently a flash of light came from its hand, and the sergeant said he felt a blast like, quote, "the breath of a tiger," and he immediately fell backwards onto the ground with his arms outstretched as if struck by lightning. The two other men, Mr. Cebu and Mr. Stan, were standing about 10 to 12 feet away. They wanted to rush forward to help, but found themselves utterly paralyzed. At this point, the very tall figure bent down and seemed to examine Radu for a few minutes. This figure was described as having hands with long claws and moved, quote, like floating in lateral jumps. One soldier watched from the barracks said that the figure moved, quote, like a man walks on water, leaning over to one side and another, but not as a bear or other animals. It was like floating when on a leg and when on the other. So this figure kind of glided away and disappeared. Instantly, the other two men, Mr. Cebu and Mr. Stan, were released from their paralysis. Two other soldiers rushed forward, and the four of them carried the lance sergeant back to the barracks. They noticed from the waist down, his body was completely rigid. He was unconscious and still clutching the club. Back in the barracks, the men looked back and could now see a, quote, wreath of lights. There were 8 in total, 4 large and 4 very small, which, quote, danced in a circle and jumped side to side. So it took about 10 minutes to awaken the sergeant, and he had no memory of anything after grabbing the bat and going towards this figure. He did not even remember approaching the creature. So the soldiers were frightened. They barricaded themselves in one room, and during this time, they heard someone or something outside scratching at the shutters. They heard a deep voice uttering something incomprehensible, which sounded like the word Sergend, whatever that means. Later, they found scratches on the shutters. This was the next day. And after that, the case was investigated by civilian researchers and, of course, the military. The military said the event was, quote, a phenomenon of electrification or magnetization of the air. I don't know what that means, but they forbade further investigations. Nevertheless, the case received considerable publicity in the Romanian press. That is a case, as you can see, that was very thoroughly investigated, not only by civilian researchers, but apparently by the government, who really just wanted all these events covered up and not discussed. But it did get into the press, and just think how many cases never do. How many people don't report their encounters. We know as UFO researchers that the vast majority of people don't. So any estimates as to how common these kinds of experiences are is probably way too low. I think there's really good indications that it's millions upon millions of people who are encountering humanoids. And I said it earlier, it's the huge number of cases that provide the best evidence that this is actually happening. So now let's go to the next case, which occurred in Argentina. I call this one a levitating humanoid. This occurred one evening in October 1978 in Godoy Cruz in Mendoza, Argentina. This is a really short case, but I thought it was very interesting. It had some unique details to it that I don't know that I've ever heard before. So that's what I mentioned earlier. Some of these cases have 100% unique elements, which just goes to show we don't fully understand what's going on here and that there's still a lot to learn about the nature of extraterrestrial contact. This case comes from researcher Vittorio Corradi, who spoke firsthand with the two witnesses, both factory workers. They are anonymous. They were working the night shift at this factory located at Godoy Cruz in Mendoza, Argentina. It was one night in October 1978. They were hard at work when suddenly, without warning, they found themselves faced by a humanoid being, a very much human-looking figure, but only 2.5 feet tall. This being was acting in a weirdly playful manner, seeming to hop on one leg. So the two witnesses froze in stunned silence at this strange sight, and according to the newspaper reports on the incident, the little man then used, quote, complicated machinery, which levitated both the men off the ground and actually left them suspended in the air, unable to move. And as these two men floated helplessly a few feet above the ground, the little man proceeded to perform a kind of pirouette and then himself began to float into the air, climbing upwards as if propelled by, quote, an invisible and powerful ray. So this little man just continued to rise upwards farther and farther and disappeared and was never seen again, at which point the two men were lowered to the ground. So yeah, a very odd case. I tried hard to get more information on that case, and I just couldn't. I nearly didn't include it because of that, but it was such a unique and unusual case that I decided, no, let's leave this in here. It was apparently researched by a UFO investigator, so there's really good indication this did happen. After all, it was a multiple witness case. But yeah, kind of sparse on details, unfortunately. So let's move to the next case. We're going to Uruguay in South America. I call this one Extremely Beautiful. This one occurred on June 14, 1980 in Libertad, Uruguay. This is a really interesting case for a number of reasons. There is physical evidence. It's a very unusual encounter. What I find most interesting is the description given by the primary witness of these ETs, who he said, as the title indicates, were extremely beautiful. This case was published in various newspapers and also appeared in the Flying Saucer Review, Volume 28, Number 1, 1982. There are two witnesses, Juan Frosch Giaciola, a 63-year-old blacksmith, and his wife, Anna Parodi. At the time, they lived in the small town of Libertad in Uruguay. They have two children. Late in the evening, around 1 a.m. on June 14, 1980, Juan was in bed listening to the radio while his wife dozed beside him. Suddenly, they both heard strange noises coming from outside the building. Anna instantly assumed that some wild animals must have been drawn to the house because they had sun-dried beef that they had hanging outside to dry. Nevertheless, Juan got out of bed, turned on the bedroom light, then went into the kitchen and turned on the front patio door light. And looking outside the kitchen window, he was shocked at what he saw. He saw two tall young people, a man and a woman, looking up in surprise at the light which he had just turned on. He said that they were very well proportioned and, quote, extremely beautiful. They looked very young, maybe 16 or 17 years old, and were unusually tall. They looked very much alike, like brother and sister. Both had somewhat pale skin, short black curly hair, long thin necks. They both wore the same outfit, what appeared to be a matte, lead-gray, skin-tight jumpsuit. As Jose said, they looked as if they were naked, and the clothing was painted on, or could have been a very fine short down sort of hair, like the hair on a cat. He said the man was very muscular, and the woman was very attractive and curvaceous, with her female anatomy almost fully exposed. As Jose said, she, quote, looked very good. Now the weirdest aspect of their appearance was the presence of what appeared to be a deep red vertically oriented scar, healed, on their foreheads, where the third eye would be. Now some authors on this case focused on this and called it a third eye, but neither witnesses ever said anything like this. It was simply a vertical scar, not a third eye. At this point, the man moved to the front door, which was unlocked, and began to push it open. Juan shouted out, "No, no, you shan't come in here." The man had wrapped his hand around the door, so Juan grabbed the back of the man's hand and tried to pry it loose, and as he did so, he felt a very strong burning sensation on his own hand, his left hand. He said it felt, quote, terribly burned, as though by fire, and in fact it was so hot and instantaneous that he was unable to describe any texture on the other man's hand, just this feeling of burning heat. Now Anna, the wife, hearing her husband call out and then the front door slam shut, she came running out to find her husband Juan holding his burned hand under his right armpit. He was doubled over with pain, and he shouted out to her, "Those chaps were trying to get in here and rob us." She examined his hand and saw that it was completely covered with multiple red burn marks. She looked out the kitchen window, but by now the strange figures were gone. Together they stayed up the rest of the night, and in the morning went directly to the police to report the incident. The police sent Juan to the local hospital. Dr. Ramon Nunez, their family doctor, examined Jose's hand and later told reporters, "I looked at the hand. He had a series of light burns distributed over the palm of the left hand. Evidently, this had been caused by contact with something very hot, but the condition was not serious." However, after 2 months, these burns had still not fully healed, and in fact, researchers counted over 42 marks still visible. Now, reportedly, Juan says that he did find some strange holes and or burn marks in the ground about 250 feet away from the house. Also, he said, this is very curious, his electric bill for that time showed excessive use of electricity, far more than he would consume in a month. The final strange detail is that Juan says that upon going to his own blacksmith shop, he noticed a very unusual odor. This was confirmed, but investigators were not able to confirm the landing traces or the excess use of electricity, and this caused some skepticism among some researchers. However, researcher Gordon Creighton, editor of the Flying Saucer Review and an article on the case, says that he finds the case quite believable. As he says, "The Frosch case strikes me as far more likely to be genuine than not. Were I a betting man, I think I would be inclined to view the strange tale of Senor Juan Fros Giacciola as very likely true." I think you'll agree that's a truly extraordinary encounter. Even though there is some question about the landing traces, the physiological effects I don't think could have been easily faked. And again, it was very thoroughly researched. But how interesting is this account because of the witness's description of these figures, these apparent extraterrestrials, being extraordinarily beautiful. We see that a lot in these human-looking ETs. They appear to have this almost perfect look about them, as if they're genetically perfect. So I don't know, it's a very interesting detail. Also interesting to me is how the witness said that they looked very much alike, even though one was male and one was female. That's another thing we see often. So these little details, to me, provide an extra level of credibility, because I don't think that the witness in this case would have known that that detail is fairly consistent. But you can always toss one case away if you want. If you don't find it credible, there's another to take its place. I must have covered by now several thousand, at least 2,000 or 3,000 humanoid cases on this channel alone. And there's plenty more where that came from. And here's another one. This is the final case in this compilation. Again, pretty short on details, but certainly super fascinating. I call this one The Aliens on the Beach. This is another case involving human-looking ETs. It occurred in November 1980, very early in the morning, near Bragança, Brazil. I like this case because this is another case where the ETs come out of a craft and approach the witness directly and start speaking with them. This case appeared in the Brazilian newspaper O Dia and was briefly mentioned in the book ETs in Brazil by Antonio Falero and in a few other places. The witness is a farmer by the name of Domingos Monteiro Brito. He was at his farm near Bragança, Brazil, when he had his encounter. It was at dawn one morning during the last week of November 1980. It was a very hot morning as Domingos decided to step out of the bedroom of his home to get some fresh air. Once he was outside, he noticed a bright glowing star-like object which immediately began to zoom towards him and descend at incredible speed. And in fact, it became larger and brighter and then stopped only a few feet away from the beach, not far from his home. It stopped for only a few seconds and then silently and smoothly descended and appeared to land on the beach. For the witness, the craft had the appearance of a flattened sphere, gray in color, very well lit. It emitted no detectable heat or odors, not from where he was standing, but immediately two human-looking figures emerged. Now, Domingos does not remember seeing any door open. Instead, his attention was mostly riveted on these two men who were now approaching him. And they walked right up to him. These two men spoke out loud in fluent Portuguese, and they started asking him questions, all kinds of questions about the environment in the area, which areas were inhabited, and which were not, and other similar questions. Domingos says he was paralyzed with fear, and in fact was so afraid that afterwards he could not really remember what or even if he answered. After asking him these questions, which he was unable to elaborate upon, the ETs told him that they would come back at dawn on December 25th. They then re-entered the craft, which immediately took off, again in perfect silence. The craft flew away at incredible speed and was gone. So Domingos reported the event to the local police, but apparently these ETs did not return as they said they would. So there you go, 10 cases from all over the world. I think this might be one of the only episodes I've covered that doesn't overtly have grays. Grays seem to dominate in a lot of UFO accounts, certainly here in the United States. But as you can see, these cases are occurring all over the world and have been occurring for a very long time. And again, whilst there are unique elements, there's also an incredible consistency to these reports. People are often struck by the ET's eyes, their really hypnotic stare, so to speak. But wow, that case from Guadalajara, Mexico, what a case that was. I'm surprised that one is not more well known. If there wasn't a UFO cover-up, this world would be such a different place. And that's one of the reasons I do this research. I really think all of us deserve to know the truth about what's going on, and that we really deserve truth and transparency with this subject, which honestly I don't think we're ever going to get from the folks behind the cover-up, certainly not voluntarily. It would take an absolute revolution. But who knows, it may happen, and I've said this before. I think disclosure is inevitable for one simple fact. The UFO phenomenon is true. It's absolutely happening. The evidence is mountainous. Those who remain skeptical simply have not done their research. I'm standing by that statement, but you can take it or leave it, because again, it's up to you to really find out what's going on here. And I'll just sign off with that. Thank you again, guys. I truly appreciate it. Until next time, keep asking those hard questions. Keep searching for the truth. Most important of all, keep having fun. I'll see you next time on another episode of UFOs and the Paranormal. Bye for now.